What if a country could win a war simply by burying something so deep that nobody dared to dig it out? And what if that entire strategy collapsed because of one phone call that pulled America's most senior general out of a room full of NATO officials and put him on a plane across the Atlantic in the middle of the night? Nobody was told what was in that briefing. The people who received it refused to say a single word about it over any phone line, encrypted or not. They insisted on saying it face to face in one room with maps that were never allowed to exist online. Before I take you inside that room, do me a quick favor. Tap the like button because it genuinely pushes this story to people who still think this conflict quietly ended. Hit subscribe if you want the full picture instead of the headline version. And if you know someone who believes the fighting stopped months ago, send them this video. Because by the time we reach the end, you will both know exactly how wrong that is. Now let's begin. Go back to June 2025. American and Israeli aircraft launched one of the most complex air campaigns of the decade. The targets were three names that nuclear inspectors had been arguing about for 20 years. Natanz, Fordo, Isfahan. The Pentagon called it Operation Midnight Hammer, and it ran for 12 straight days. American bombers dropped enormous bunker-busting weapons, the kind built for one specific purpose, to punch through layers of rock and reinforced concrete and destroy whatever is hiding underneath. Enrichment halls were torn open, tunnel entrances collapsed. Satellite images afterward showed hillsides that looked like they had been reshaped by an earthquake. On the surface, it looked like a clean knockout. But the real story was never about the buildings. For years, Iran had been enriching uranium to 60% purity. That number sounds technical, so let me make it simple. Weapons-grade uranium is about 90%. Going from natural uranium to 60% is the long, slow, exhausting part of the journey. Going from 60 to 90 is the short sprint at the end. Some experts describe it as being 90% of the way there in terms of effort, even though the number on paper says 60. So when those bombs fell, the question that mattered inside every intelligence agency on Earth was not how many centrifuges were destroyed. It was one simple thing. Where is the stockpile? Because Iran had built up roughly 440 kilograms of that 60% material. According to the International Nuclear Watchdog's own math, about 42 kilograms of it, if pushed the rest of the way, is enough for one weapon. Do the division. That stockpile sat in the range of 10 bombs worth of fuel. And after the strikes, nobody outside Iran could say with certainty where a single gram of it was. Now here is where the story turns from military to psychological. Inside Tehran, officials looked at the same destruction the rest of the world was looking at, and they did not see a defeat. They saw a shield. Think about it from their side. If the tunnels had collapsed, then the uranium inside those tunnels was buried under thousands of tons of rock. Buried meant hidden. Hidden meant untouchable. And untouchable meant nobody could take it away without physically sending soldiers into Iran to dig. That was the whole idea. Not resistance, not retaliation, just wait. Just dirt and concrete doing the job an army could not. Iran moved quickly to lock that advantage in place. His parliament passed a law banning international inspectors from Natanz, Fordo, and Isfahan entirely. The IAEA pulled its remaining staff out of the country for their own safety. And Iran's foreign minister went on American television and said the quiet part out loud. The material was under the rubble. Nobody was reaching it without starting a ground war. It sounded like a threat. It was actually an offer. Leave it alone and nothing happens. Come and get it, and you own everything that follows. For a while it worked. And this was never just a private standoff between two capitals. Israel had its own analysts studying every satellite pass over that tunnel complex, frame by frame. Gulf states sitting a few minutes of missile flight. From Iran's coastline were quietly rewriting their defense assumptions. Oil traders flinched every time someone typed the words Strait of Hormuz into a headline. Because if Iran could keep that material buried and intact, then a much bigger idea was being tested in public. The idea that pressure, sanctions, and precision bombing can genuinely stop a country from reaching the nuclear line. That belief has held the global order together for decades, and in the summer of 2025, it was suddenly on trial. But here is what almost nobody outside the region understood at the time. Those 12 days in June were not the ending, they were the prologue. 8 months later, on the 28th of February 2026, the war came back, and this time, it did not stop after 12 days. American and Israeli forces struck again, but the target list had grown far beyond nuclear sites. Military command centers, government buildings, air defense networks. The fighting spread into Lebanon and shook the entire region. And in the very first wave, Iran's supreme leader, the man who had held ultimate power for 36 years, was killed. Let that sink in for a second. An entire political system built around one man for over 3 decades lost that man in a single night. Within days, under enormous pressure from the Revolutionary Guard, Iran's assembly of experts elevated his son to take his place. a mid-ranking cleric, a name most people outside Iran had never heard. He inherited a title, an ideology, and a war, all in the same week. This is the world the uranium story actually lives inside. Not the short summer conflict everyone remembers, but a longer, darker one that kept grinding forward month after month. And underneath all of it, somewhere beneath collapsed tunnel entrances at Isfahan, that same stockpile of 60% enriched uranium was still sitting there. Unseen, unverified, untouched by inspectors, cameras, or anyone else. By early spring of 2026, something changed in Washington. The conversation stopped being about more airstrikes, because everyone in the room understood the limits of bombing. You cannot bomb uranium out of existence. You can bury it, seal it, complicate it, but it remains. It keeps existing. And material that exists can be dug back up when the world stops watching. So a different question started circulating in briefings. What if we don't destroy it? What if we go and take it? In late March 2026, major American outlets reported that the Pentagon had delivered a plan to the president, one he had personally asked for, to physically seize Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium. Not strike it, not bury it deeper, extract it, load it, fly it out of the country entirely. Around the same period, the Director of National Intelligence told lawmakers that the intelligence community had high confidence about where the material was located. Surveillance over the tunnel entrances at Isfahan was described as constant, not periodic, constant. And then in May, the story sharpened into something almost cinematic. According to reporting, citing two sources familiar with the matter, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff made an emergency trip to U.S. Central Command headquarters in Tampa, Florida, on the 19th of May. He did not wait for his scheduled flight. He cut short a meeting with senior NATO officials in Brussels and crossed the Atlantic immediately. Stop and think about what that actually means. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs is one of the most tracked, scheduled, choreographed human beings on the planet. His calendar is planned weeks ahead and coordinated across allied governments. For him to stand up, leave a room full of NATO partners with no real explanation, and fly straight to Central Command, something had crossed a threshold that ordinary reporting simply does not capture. And the briefings waiting for him were treated as so sensitive that commanders reportedly refused to discuss them over any electronic line at all. Not on secure video, not on encrypted phones, in person only, paper only, eyes in the room only. A Joint Staff spokesperson later declined to comment on any of it. In Washington, that kind of silence usually says more than a denial ever could. Then the chairman briefed the president directly. So what was actually on the table? Based on reporting from multiple major outlets, the operation looked like something out of a thriller, except every detail was grounded in brutal practicality. Heavy excavation equipment would have to be flown in by helicopter, bulldozers, earth movers, not because that is efficient, but because the roads near the sites were either destroyed or far too exposed for a convoy to survive. A temporary airstrip would have to be built from scratch, close enough to the buried tunnels for C-17 cargo planes to land. Built quickly, built under threat, built in the dark. Specialized teams would go in, nuclear material handling experts working shoulder to shoulder with special operations forces who would hold a security perimeter while the digging happened, possibly while under fire. And here's the detail that gives me chills. There is historical precedent for exactly this kind of plan. Decades earlier, during the Iran hostage crisis, American planners designed an operation that involved airlifting a heavy bulldozer into Iran to solve a nearly identical underground access problem. That entire era of American planning inside Iran ended in humiliation and death in the desert when a rescue mission collapsed before it ever reached Tehran. Whether anyone brought that history into the room in 2026, we do not know. But the echo is impossible to ignore. A former Secretary of the Army spoke publicly once the plan became known, and she did not soften anything. An operation at Isfahan alone, she estimated, would require at least 1,000 troops, helicopters for the machinery, elite forces, possibly including Ranger units working alongside nuclear disablement specialists, trained to locate and secure radioactive material underground. And then she said the sentence that should stay with you. A mission like this would probably take casualties, not might, probably. Every stage of it would unfold under the threat of drones, shoulder-fired missiles, and something even worse. Tunnels deliberately rigged to collapse or explode on anyone who tried to dig through them. Iran had months to prepare that ground, months to turn a burial site into a trap. And even lifting the canisters out was only half the problem. Enriched uranium in this form is stored in heavy metal cylinders. Those cylinders would need to be transferred into specialized transport casks designed to prevent any radioactive leak during the flight out. That is delicate, slow, careful work. Now imagine doing it while someone is shooting at you. Two versions of the plan were reportedly debated. In one, the material leaves Iran completely. In the other, nuclear experts dilute it on site, under armed guard, without ever putting it on an aircraft. Either version meant American personnel spending hours, possibly days, standing inside a hostile country holding the most dangerous material on Earth. And this was not a document quietly sitting in a folder. Real forces started moving. Thousands of soldiers from the 82nd Airborne Division were ordered toward the Middle East, including senior command staff, not just rank and file. A Marine Expeditionary Unit repositioned into Gulf waters. That unit choice matters more than most people realize. The 82nd Airborne is not a general-purpose formation. Its entire doctrine is built around one specific mission profile: seize an airfield under fire, hold it. Secure weapons of mass destruction. That is almost word for word what this operation would have demanded. Geography made it harder still. Isfahan and Natanz sit roughly 150 kilometers apart. Fordo is buried inside a mountain. Planners reportedly examined an Iranian airbase only a few miles from the Isfahan complex as a possible landing point, alongside the option of simply carving a runway out of empty ground. Either way, paratroopers would need to take and hold that terrain within hours, then convert it into a functioning American logistics hub deep inside enemy territory before sunrise. All of this was moving while the chairman sat in Tampa being briefed on how to execute it. Internally, the operation's risk was reportedly rated at the extreme end of the military's own scale, which translates into one uncomfortable truth. Even in the best-case version, American deaths were not a possibility to be managed. They were close to an expectation to be accepted. And none of this was happening in a political vacuum either. Members of Congress had already been pushing back on the wider war for months, at one point forcing a vote on a measure to limit the president's ability to keep fighting without their approval. That vote failed, but it revealed something important. Patience inside America itself was not unlimited. If you're only now realizing how close a real American ground operation inside Iran came to happening, do this for me. Leave one word in the comments telling me whether you think it should have been launched. I read them, and the comment section on this one is going to be fascinating. And while your thumb is already down there, tap like, because this story deserves to reach people who still think it was all just headlines. Now let's get to the part that surprises everyone. With the plan built, the general briefed, and the paratroopers moving, why did it never happen? According to the reporting, after the chairman walked the president through every option, the president did not approve it, but he also did not reject it. He placed the mission on what one account described as a brief hold. Paused, not canceled. And that single word difference is the entire hinge of this story, because canceling a plan destroys the leverage it creates. The moment you cancel, the other side exhales. Pausing does the opposite. Pausing leaves the loaded weapon sitting on the table, in full view, with everyone in the room knowing exactly how quickly it can be picked back up. Sources describe two specific warnings given to the president. First, that a ground operation would almost certainly trigger severe Iranian retaliation, potentially spiraling into a wider regional war and shaking the global economy. Second, that American casualties were likely, given the risk rating the military itself had assigned. Around this same period, when asked about a different high-risk option involving Iranian oil infrastructure, the president made a remark that captured the whole dilemma. He said he did not know whether America had the stomach for it. Read that carefully. He was not questioning what the military could do. He was questioning whether the country back home would accept the cost of doing it. Those are two completely different problems, and the second one has ended more military plans than any enemy ever has. But do not mistake the pause for weakness, because something else was happening in parallel. By multiple accounts, frustration with Iran's negotiating behavior was getting worse week by week. Iranian negotiators would move close to agreement, then add fresh conditions, then walk things back, then restart. It was a strategy built on patience, designed to outlast attention spans. And that is precisely why keeping the ground option alive mattered so much. Look at it from Tehran's chair. Without a credible threat of American soldiers physically digging through that rubble and flying out with the uranium, what real incentive existed to concede anything? Sanctions can be absorbed over years. Airstrikes can be repaired around. Both are painful. Neither is final. But an extraction operation is final. If foreign troops walk out of your country carrying your most valuable strategic asset, you do not rebuild that. You do not spin it back up. It is simply gone, and gone forever. There is a well-known principle in strategy that explains why this worked. A threat only changes behavior when the other side genuinely believes you will follow through. Empty threats teach people to ignore you. Iran had been ignoring threats for decades. What made this one different was that it was not made of words. It was made of a 4-star general changing his flight plans. It was made of an airborne division sending senior command staff towards staging areas. It was made of risk assessments written on paper inside the Pentagon, and briefings too sensitive for encrypted lines. Iran was not being asked to imagine a hypothetical. Iran was watching the machinery of an operation being assembled in real time, piece by piece, in front of its own satellites. And that pressure produced a result. On the 17th of June 2026, the United States and Iran signed what is now known as the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding, a 14-point framework mediated by Pakistan's Prime Minister and Army Chief, with Qatari and Omani involvement alongside American envoys. The American side was led by the Vice President, working with 2 special envoys. The Iranian side was led by the Parliament Speaker and the Foreign Minister. The agreement was signed electronically, with the American President adding his name from Versailles during a G7 summit in France, and the Iranian President signing from Tehran shortly afterward. On paper, it was extraordinary. Active fighting halted on every front. The Strait of Hormuz reopened to shipping. The American naval blockade lifted. Oil export waivers were issued. A framework was set for a $300 billion Gulf-funded reconstruction program tied directly to Iranian cooperation on the nuclear file. One senior American official described the arrangement like a dial. As Iranian behavior improved, sanctions relief would be turned up to match. And for the first time in the entire crisis, something specific about the uranium itself was written down. One clause committed Iran to a minimum methodology of downblending its 60% stockpile on site under IAEA supervision. Here is the detail that tells you everything. According to reporting at the time, that downblending language was not in the draft that had leaked only days earlier. It was inserted at American insistence in the final hours before signing. That is what leverage looks like when it works. A sentence appearing at the last minute in a document that decides the fate of 10 bombs worth of material. Let me explain downblending simply, because this is the heart of everything that follows. Enrichment means spinning uranium through centrifuges to concentrate the specific isotope needed for a weapon, pushing the percentage higher and higher. Downblending is the reverse. You mix that highly enriched material back into lower grade uranium, diluting it until it can no longer be used for a weapon. Done properly, under real supervision, it genuinely removes danger from the world. The trap is hidden in those 2 words, done properly. The process has to actually take place. It has to be watched from beginning to end by people who are allowed inside. And the machines capable of undoing it have to be dealt with as well. Otherwise, you have not solved the problem. You have simply changed the label on it. And this is exactly where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because Iran's original plan, bury it and wait, starts to look less like a failure and more like something that quietly evolved into a new shape. Non-proliferation researchers pointed out the obvious flaw almost immediately. Downblending is reversible. You can dilute uranium from 60% to 5%, and that looks wonderful in a press release. But if the centrifuges that produced it in the first place still exist inside the country, and they do, then that same material can in principle be enriched right back up again later. A separate nuclear monitoring group sharpened the concern even further. The agreement said nothing about dismantling Iran's enrichment infrastructure. It said nothing about the kind of anytime, anywhere inspector access needed to truly verify compliance, and it contained no automatic mechanism to snap sanctions back into place if Iran were later caught quietly reversing course once global attention drifted elsewhere. Even independent arms control analysts who welcomed the deal described it honestly, a flawed but valuable step. It stopped a war that had already killed thousands and destabilized the world economy. It never proved that pressure alone could erase Iran's nuclear capability. In other words, the celebrated breakthrough left the single most dangerous question of the entire war completely unanswered. And this is not a new pattern. Nuclear agreements that sound airtight in a signing ceremony have collapsed before, almost always for the same 2 reasons. Verification turns out to be far harder in practice than on paper, and breaking a promise becomes easier once the cameras leave and the negotiators move on to the next crisis. The people who wrote the Islamabad Memorandum knew that history perfectly well, which makes it even more telling that they still could not close every gap before the ink dried. If this is making you rethink everything you assumed about how these deals actually work, hit that notification bell right now. What happens in the final stretch of this video completely reframes everything we have covered so far, and you will not want to hear about it secondhand. Now here is a detail that stings. Months before Islamabad was ever signed, Iran's own foreign minister had already appeared on American television and said Tehran was willing to dilute its enriched stockpile in exchange for sanctions relief. That statement came in March 2026, before the Tampa briefing, before the extraction plan was fully assembled, before a single paratrooper moved toward the region, which leaves a question analysts keep circling back to, and nobody can answer cleanly. How much of that enormous pressure campaign was actually necessary to obtain a concession Iran had already hinted it might make on its own? Maybe the pressure is what turned a vague hint into a written clause. Maybe the hint was always a negotiating tactic, and the pressure simply called the bluff. Or maybe 2 governments spent months and lives arriving at a destination that was visible from the beginning, and there is another form of pressure Iran was under. one that had nothing to do with Washington at all. In July 2026, a confidential report prepared for the Iranian president was leaked. It was based on polling conducted in May by Iran's own state-linked opinion research center, and the picture it painted was of a government running out of road. Only 9% of respondents said they wanted to keep the political system exactly as it is. 53% called for fundamental structural reform. Another 19% wanted the system replaced entirely. Add that up. Nearly three-quarters of Iranians wanted either deep change or a different government altogether. The rest of the numbers were just as heavy. Around 64% reported persistent anger, sharply higher than in a similar survey taken only months before. Roughly half described feeling hopeless. 60% said they distrusted major national institutions. 81% said they struggled, at least partly simply to afford enough food. 75% struggled with medical costs. Only about 8% earned enough to save anything at all. And when asked who was responsible, the answers were the most revealing part of the entire report. Nearly 47% blamed government inefficiency. 26% blamed corruption. Only about 21% pointed at foreign sanctions. Most Iranians surveyed were not primarily angry at Washington. They were angry at their own leadership. One analyst who reviewed the report said publicly that, if anything, it probably understated how deep that anger really runs. Now think about what it means for a government to quietly commission a survey like that about itself, and then watch the results leak into the open. It means the people at the very top already knew how fragile everything had become. Picture that leadership. It had just watched its supreme leader killed. It had rushed his son into power under military pressure. It was fighting a foreign war. And now it was staring at data showing that 9 out of 10 citizens no longer wanted the system to continue as it is. That is not a government negotiating from confidence. That is a government trying to survive on two fronts at once, foreign and domestic, and increasingly unsure which one might finish it first. Put both pressures side by side, and Iran's sudden flexibility in June makes complete sense. The Islamic Republic has survived sanctions, isolation, and limited strikes many times before. What it had never faced was a serious foreign military threat, arriving at the exact moment its own economy was collapsing beneath its people. But underneath every clause and every poll number sits the problem that never went away. That stockpile, 440.9 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium, according to the agency's records right before the original 2025 strikes. Roughly 10 weapons worth of fuel if fully processed. And the technical work needed to move from 60 to 90% is a small fraction of the effort already spent getting to 60. Some estimates put that remaining step at weeks, not years. For months, inspectors have had essentially no access to verify anything. The IAEA's Director General has pointed to satellite images showing regular vehicle movement near the tunnel entrance at Isfahan as the strongest available clue. But a clue is not proof. Right now, nobody outside Iran can say with confidence where all of that material, actual Y, is. Whether it remains buried at Isfahan, whether it was quietly relocated, or whether portions of it were dispersed before the first bombs ever fell in 2025. So how seriously did Iran take the extraction threat? Forget the speeches. Watch the behavior. Negotiating positions that had been frozen for weeks began shifting almost as soon as word of the plan started leaking. Because Iran's leadership understood something a lot of commentary missed. This was not theater dressed up as strategy. An airborne division does not send its senior command staff toward the Middle East for a training rotation. A 4-star general does not walk out of a NATO meeting and cross an ocean overnight to be briefed on a hypothetical. For years, Tehran had built its entire posture on one assumption, that America would always consider a ground operation too expensive to actually start. Air power, yes. Sanctions, yes. Sabotage, absolutely. But not soldiers standing on Iranian soil, digging. That assumption was the foundation of the bury it and wait strategy. And in May 2026, for the first time, Iran watched that foundation crack, not in a speech, in a deployment order. Before I tell you what is happening right now this week, one small ask. If this video has earned your time, send it to one person who still believes this story ended with a handshake in June. That single share does more than any algorithm trick I could pull. Now here is the part almost nobody is talking about. Stop the clock in June 2026, and this looks like a hopeful story. A ceasefire. A signed framework. A war winding down. Now look at today. On the 8th of July, the American president publicly declared the Islamabad agreement over, while adding that negotiators could still talk. 10 days later, on the 18th of July, Iran's deputy foreign minister announced that Iran had formally suspended its own commitments under the memorandum, accusing Washington of breaking it first. And the fighting did not merely resume, it accelerated. As of this week, American forces have carried out 9 consecutive nights of strikes across Iran. Iran's health ministry reports more than 50 people killed and over 500 injured since the start of July alone. A desalination plant was hit, cutting off water for tens of thousands of civilians. Strikes have reportedly landed near a nuclear site in southern Iran, putting nuclear infrastructure firmly back into the target set. The United States reimposed its naval blockade and withdrew the sanctions waivers granted only weeks earlier. Traffic through the Strait of Hormuz has fallen sharply. The region has seen a surge in GPS spoofing, with ships appearing on radar in places they have never been. American fuel prices sit roughly a third higher than before the war began. Markets shudder with every new night of strikes. Iran has fired missiles and drones at American allies across the Gulf, striking Kuwait and sending projectiles toward Jordan, with one Iranian military advisor warning of a possible full-scale offensive. American service members have been killed in the renewed fighting. Israel, watching from the edge, says it is ready to resume full combat the moment it is attacked. And Iran's new supreme leader, the son of the man killed in the war's opening hours, has vowed to teach America unforgettable lessons, declaring that the American president's signature has been proven worthless. But beneath all that noise sits the detail that matters most for this specific story. Iran has now barred IAEA inspectors from returning at all, which means the downblending process, the single clause that was supposed to make this entire crisis disappear, the one everyone celebrated in June, was very likely never completed. And now it cannot even be verified either way. And the extraction plan briefed in Tampa? It was never canceled. It was paused. A threat on pause is not a threat removed. It is a threat still loaded, still funded, still rehearsed, waiting for one word. Here is one final number worth sitting with. The Islamabad memorandum set a 60-day window for both sides to reach a complete final agreement. Counting from the June signing, the deadline falls in the middle of August. We are not there yet. Which means, technically, the clock both nations agreed to is still ticking, even as missiles fly and inspectors stand locked outside the country. The paperwork insists there is still time to fix this. The battlefield disagrees. So what does all of this actually prove? Iran spent the better part of a year believing that if it buried its uranium deep enough, America would eventually grow tired and walk away. The opposite happened. The rubble bought Iran time. It never bought Iran safety. The moment Washington built a real, specific, fully resourced plan to take that material by force and moved actual troops to prove it was not bluffing, Iran's entire calculation changed. For the first time, Tehran put a commitment about its most protected material into writing. But a written promise survives only as long as both sides believe breaking it costs more than keeping it. And tonight, as strikes hit Iranian soil for the 9th night running, as a nation counts its dead, and as a new supreme leader promises revenge for his father, that belief is already gone. Remember the phone call at the start of this video, the one that pulled a general out of a NATO meeting and put him on a plane in the dark. That call is the whole story compressed into one moment. Quiet, invisible, utterly decisive. It never made a front page the way the bombings did, yet it did more to move Iran's position than any airstrike or any speech. That is how history actually works. Not in the explosions we all watch, but in the rooms we never see, where a handful of people decide how far they are willing to go. Iran buried its uranium, hoping the world would lose interest. Instead, it triggered the most serious plan for an American ground operation inside Iranian territory in a generation. That plan is still sitting on a shelf, complete, rehearsed, and waiting. Whether it stays there or whether we are about to watch the most secretive military operation of our lifetime finally receive the order to move is the biggest unanswered question left in this entire war. And the uranium, it is still out there, still unverified. Still counted in bombs, not kilograms. Somewhere under that ground, the most dangerous secret on Earth is waiting to find out who reaches it first.